Appreciate y'all for pulling up. I'm your host, Gabbo. We back with another one. We got Missing 9 Months Underground, the I promise you I could read. So we got this cave tragedy that we're here to discuss. Sometimes, bro, since I've started my YouTube channel, bro, and started really following these scary stories, these creepy scenarios, I just learned so much about the ways I don't want to go out in this world, bro. Some of these people experience just nightmares prior to death, you know, and some of these stories you would never find me in a million years, like being on a boat, in a ship, in a submarine, in a cave. Like, what's a black man doing in a cave? Every single time I react to these stories, it's always the most insane scenario, just the definition of being petrified before one dies. And this one just kind of gives me a vibe that, yeah, bro, missing for 9 months underground is crazy. So we're gonna get right into it. Hit the like and subscribe button, because your boy's consistent, man. Let's get right into the story.
Discoveries. It can pique the interest of even the most inexperienced caver. Solo expeditions are fraught with danger and generally discouraged among the caving community for technically
I have no
challenging
business
caves.
doing that, bro.
But sometimes the lure is too great, and the consequences are devastating. This is the fatal breakdown of the Veryovkina Cave Tragedy. Sergei Kozyev had been collecting bits of information about the Veryovkina Cave for nearly a year. He was a 37-year-old husband and father who participated in many adventurous pursuits. This cave had recently been declared to be the deepest on Earth, at over 1.3 miles deep. There is a lateral cave system at the bottom that stretches on for a half a mile, with a labyrinth of tunnels and sumps. Although he had only been caving twice, this incredibly challenging cave became an idea that he just couldn't shake. The extreme depth of this cave required several overnight stops to make it to the bottom. Permanent camps were established by the Veryovkina caving team from Russia. This group had explored the cave system several times and continued to make new discoveries of depth and tunnels over a period of several years. This group worked in large teams, with extensive preparations for each expedition. Sergei had heard about the most recent trip, which nearly ended in disaster in 2018. The Veryovkina caving team was on an expedition
That sounds like
with
a
National
warning.
Geographic photographer Robbie Schoen when a massive flood pulse of water rushed through to the lowest part of the cave. A group of 8 were in the lowest base camp after a 4-day trek to the deepest part of the mile-deep cave system. A flood of water came in that sounded like a freight train. The group retreated to their camp to wait out the flow, where it was expected to seep down through the extensive cave tunnels and pose no risk to their camp. A gurgling sound was heard from behind their tent, and a quick inspection revealed an overflowing open hole. The lower levels were already full, and the water was now rising in their chamber. They had only a few minutes to gather the most important items and flee to higher ground. This meant climbing up a narrow vertical shaft through a raging river of water. The Russian caving team felt confident and calm about such an escape, but Robbie Schoen felt no such comfort. He was as scared as he'd ever been in his life, truly uncertain if he would survive this unexpected emergency. Climbing up the rope in a torrent of water was bad enough, but squeezing through the choke point where it was spewing from was physically painful. He tucked his head down to allow himself to breathe while moving up the rope through the narrow passage. The water beating on his helmet felt like a weight pushing his head into his shoulders. The entire group made it up to the next camp, but was trapped there for 16 hours waiting for the water flood to subside. The entire lower level was completely flooded, and would have meant certain death for anyone who did not escape.
Now,
in
my
time.
question is, where the hell is this water coming from, bro? Where is this water coming from?
Sergei had heard about the harrowing story, which was told in many versions, including a National Geographic article with pictures from Robbie Schoen. Sergei had reviewed these pictures, collected maps, and taken screenshots on his phone of several items relating to exploring this cave. For most people, the near-death experience of the Russian group would have put Veryovkina off limits. But not Sergei. He was an adventurous guy who liked to hike, climb, and run marathons. His wife and children didn't know about his plans to visit the deepest cave on Earth. He only said that he was off to find the meaning of life and would be back in about a week. On November 1st, 2020...
Pretty sure the meaning of life, you're not going to find the answers in the cave, bro. Like, something about these men that are just have a passion for adventure. Like, it's like they ignore all signs of danger. Now, granted, they're not just walking into things recklessly, but it's their decisions to make certain, like, yo, I'm gonna go down this cave, like, for what?
Sergei drove a few hours from his home in
If it ain't
Sochi,
oil
Russia,
down there
to the
or gold?
Veryovkina Cave. It was quite a hike up the side of a mountain just to get to the entrance of the cave. He used new climbing crampons and trekking poles to make his way up the mountain to the entrance. Sergei was familiar with climbing and brought some basic equipment for the cave adventure. The first drop would require him to set up a rappelling rope from the top of the cave entrance to lower into the main well of the cave. It was here that he left his cloth backpack and transferred his equipment and food to waterproof bags to carry deep into the cave. He was expecting to encounter some wet passages and flows of water in various parts of the descent. He's marked his map where water was expected, but did not bring any waterproof clothes. The map he had printed out showed the main camps that were established by the Veryovkina team. He did not have permission to be in the cave, and certainly not to use their equipment left in the permanent camps. Nonetheless, he was planning to use their base camps to rest between the climbs down to the bottom, over a mile deep into the mountain. He had notes on his map with information he had gathered about particular passages, problem areas, and times expected to traverse each section. The Veryovkina team had extensive preparations, massive stocks of supplies, installed communications, and large teams of climbers to ensure safety for the 3 or 4 day climb to the bottom of the cave. Sergei had just himself and the supplies he carried on his back. It seems that he thought he was prepared for what he would encounter at Veryovkina, but he was wrong. The first part of the descent was through very narrow and tight cave passages.
Now, come on, at this point, I'm heading back.
This would be over 1,200 feet of difficult caving.
First of all, you're digging a mile below surface, and it's in a cave, and you got to fit yourself in between rocks and like these little tunnels that are just barely thin enough for a human to be able to fit in. It's not designed for man. It's not designed for any human to really go down there. Like,
Several bags of supplies to drag behind and push through the tight squeezes. Sergei reached the first camp at 1,250 feet. This camp is the staging area for making the largest vertical drop in the entire cave system. The Babatunda pit is an incredible 500 feet deep. This requires a rope descent without access to any ledges or stops. It's straight to the bottom in this huge cavern. The PST team had a rope system left in place where a climber could lower themselves into the pit, using a friction rope descent, then use hand ascenders with foot stirrups to climb back up. He noted that it would take him 6 hours to go from the entrance well to the bottom of the pit. His notes also show that he thought the trip back would take 2 more hours than the trip down this pit. For Sergei, it must have been a daunting prospect looking down into the incredible depth. He decided to reorganize his bags and left one of the less essential bags at Camp 1. The PST team had a huge lighting setup for the entire team to see each other. Sergei would have had his own single headlamp, with a limited range. As Sergei lowered himself into the pit, he may have been completely exhilarated finding the adventure he was seeking, or he may have felt stressed by seeing the condition of the drop. No wall climbing or rappelling, but center isolation that would make going back up a real challenge. And you still go down. You still go down. First of all, this expedition, I'm just too black for it, bro. I'm just gonna keep it a bean. He still chose to go down despite not even outside of the light being on his helmet. That's just darkness. That's like the definition of the abyss. And he still went through it. No matter his feelings, Sergei lowered himself in the pit using the PST setup and continued on the hike down into the cave system. The bottom of the pit ended just a few hundred feet from Camp 2 at 2,000 feet. Camp 2 was a permanent camp set up by the Veryovkina team. They left the camps largely cleared out, but did leave some items for long-term storage. There was a tent, gas for heat and cooking, as well as a few non-perishable items of food like ketchup. The strange thing about Sergei's trip is that he was planning to be gone a week, theoretically enough time to travel to the bottom and back up, according to the large PST team's timeline. It was clear that he ended up spending about 6 or 7 days in Camp 2 at a depth of 2,000 feet. It is likely that at this point, he was concerned about the trip back up the Babatunda pit. His descent into the pit might have started easily enough, but 500 feet is a long way for a controlled descent. He would have been fresh and strong, allowing him to muscle his way through the exhausting effort. But clearly, Sergei found himself in a devastating position. He realized too late that he'd either forgotten or miscalculated an essential component of his climbing gear. Oh shit. He had no foot stirrups. Over several days, Sergei likely attempted ascending in every way he could imagine. He probably attempted rock climbing around the perimeter, but that was impossible with the angles, distance, and equipment he had. A pure climbing of the rope with only hand ascenders is just not possible. Pulling your body weight up over and over without the assistance of your lower body and placed to rest along the way is an impossible feat. Sergei was using up his food resources in Camp 2 and didn't have the proper equipment to go back up.
Wow.
The 6 days he spent at this camp
Wow.
were probably filled with heroic efforts to try to ascend, and exhausted lapses of time where he rested and tried to recover. His only options at this point were to wait out a rescue or find a way to climb out.
Get the fuck out of here.
No one even knew he was in this.
Could you imagine the 911 call? Could you imagine? Hey, we have a buddy that's stuck about 1,000 feet below ground. He's in the cave. He descended. You know, he grabbed all the equipment he needed to descend, but forgot all the equipment he needed to come back up. Like, who do you send? You're not sending the police. like, I'm sorry, bro. Like, this is completely avoidable. Avoidable.
This cave, and it was rarely visited. So waiting around would mean starving or freezing to death once the gas ran out.
Oh, man.
As for climbing out, he had spent days trying everything he could to get out. Each day left him weaker and weaker, with little food remaining. No matter his reasoning, Sergei decided to descend to the next camp after at least 6 days at Camp 2. He probably was looking for food and additional climbing equipment. If he could just locate a pair of stirrups and a little food, then he could possibly climb 3,300 feet back to the top. The trip down from Camp 2 to Camp 3 would have been extremely difficult for someone not in peak physical condition. The PST team might have made this descent in 4 hours, but alone and weak, Sergei probably struggled to reach this depth at 3,300 feet. But Sergei did make it to Camp 3. It was a small victory, but was not the salvation that he hoped for. Camp 3 did not have any food or supplies that could help him.
More rocks and dirt.
We don't know how long he stayed at this camp, but it would not have been for long. He was probably wet, cold, hungry, and exhausted. The only chance to survive and save himself would be to go even lower into the cave system.
What?
He had his map and knew that there was another camp a little over 1,000 feet below.
Oh my gosh.
He was probably completely spent, but had the will to survive pulling him along. Surely thoughts of his family would have made him fight through the desire to just sit still and fall asleep. At this depth in the cave, water was a constant issue. The trickle up above became a spray of water in some passages, and a waterfall in others. With 100% humidity in the cave, he wasn't able to dry himself. He was wearing cotton overalls, and didn't bring the proper dry suit for this kind of caving. At just 40 degrees, the cave and water temperature kept him in mild hypothermia without heat from the gas lamps up in the previous camp.
Crazy.
Sergei had to keep moving if he wanted to prevent severe hypothermia, but he was exhausted and had no food for energy. The only solution was to keep going. Sergei got his gear together and lowered himself off the ledge. Exactly what happened over the next 300 feet is unknown. It's generally thought that Sergei succumbed to hypothermia. He would have been wet in cotton clothes, trying to lower himself on ropes in the incredibly cold environment of such a deep, wet cave system. Some think he may have fallen in his weakened state. He was wearing a caving helmet to protect his head, but the circumstances were just impossible, no matter the final straw that cost him his life. His wife started to worry after he did not return within a week as planned. She alerted authorities that he hadn't returned, but she had no idea where he went caving. The Veryovkina Cave was over 2 hours from his house, and he did not make the proper request to explore this cave. Months passed, and it seemed that something terrible must have happened. It was fully 9 months later in August of 2021, when the PST team was ready for a new expedition into the cave. When they arrived at Veryovkina, they saw a rope dropped over the entrance ledge, which was highly improper. Leaving a rope at the entrance was against protocol, since anyone might mistake it for an invitation into the challenging cave. The team moved into the cave and followed their normal pathways to climb down to the first camp. Along the way, they came across a set of trekking poles and crampons, as well as a cloth backpack. It was clear that someone had been here. At the next camp, the evidence of an unauthorized caver was everywhere. Missing food, empty packaging, and open storage boxes made it clear that someone had stayed at the camp for a while. Judging by the evidence in the portable toilet, it looked like someone had spent 6 or 7 days at the camp. The team was a little annoyed, but also concerned. Was this climber still here in the cave? They would unfortunately find out on their trek to the bottom. At the 3,600-foot mark, there was a body hanging from their ropes, and clearly it had been there for a long time. The team was devastated to find that the caver was dead. His body was folded to the side, dangling from the ascenders he had connected to the main rope. Below him were 2 plastic caving bags. He had 2 cell phones with him and a multi-tool knife. The team could quickly see that he was ill-equipped for this type of expedition. He wasn't properly dressed, had no backup equipment in case of failure, and had no foot stirrups attached to his ascenders. The team took his cell phones and were able to find pictures that could be sent to authorities to identify the man. The terrible reality for his wife was compounded by the fact that they could not just pull his body out of the cave for burial. The grueling ascent was a serious challenge for any individual, and there just wasn't a way to lift him out through tight squeezes, curving tunnels, and long rope climbing ascents.
Sheesh.
The only solution was to dismember his body into manageable pieces that could be transported safely. After getting the funding and permission to do so, a team of over 100 people prepared his body and slowly lifted the pieces out of the mile-deep cave. His wife finally had some answers as to what had happened to Sergei, and was able to lay his body to rest after a 9-month-long wait. Exactly what happened to Sergei in that cave is not known. He left evidence behind on his cell phones, on his body, and in the camps. The position of his body and the supplies he had with him helped to form a story around what likely happened. There are other scenarios that may have resulted in the same evidence being left behind, but the conclusion rests on the most obvious pathway. His internal thoughts cannot be known, but we can certainly empathize with how he must have felt. He attempted an incredible challenge, and unfortunately, lost his life.
Bro, this was probably the most avoidable death I think I've ever reacted to. Like, this is like literally 1% chance of happening to the average human being, and Sergei was that 1% chance. Like, to even want to descend into a cavern as a grown man with bills is beyond me. I don't know where you find that kind of free time, but to go out like that and to go in there ill-prepared with not enough resources and not a plan B in case shit goes left is even more crazy to me. Sounds like a suicide mission if you ask me, bro. For real. But this was missing 9 months underground, bro. Never. There's just never. Like, what do you think you're gonna find in that hole, bro? Who descends 2 miles underground? What do you think you're gonna find besides dust, rocks, and shadow? I'm good, bro. I'm good just minding my business forever. Certain curiosities about life are just none of my business, and it keeps me alive that way, man. Damn, unfortunate what happened to this man's life. It's just a crazy story, bro. Why would anybody even want to sign up for that? Even if the goal is expedition. Like, come on, bro. You gotta go. If I'm doing an expedition, I gotta go in 20 deep. 20 deep. Not going dolly, not going with 2 people. No. I gotta make sure I got my phone. That bitch better come with Wi-Fi. Man, I want no smoke with not being able to call 911 in case shit go left. I want no smoke with that. But it's a true story, bro. In memory of Sergei Kovac. Damn, it's just a crazy story. But this was missing 9 months underground. Y'all let me know in the comment section what y'all thought about this story. I'm just telling y'all, I'm too black for this. I don't gotta worry about dying in the cave, bro, because I just would never. I don't care what's in the cave. I don't care what they got going on. But I'm gonna holler at y'all next video, bro. That's an insane way to go out. Just insane.